Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Extremely courageous, brave, selfless acts by these bystanders, these Good Samaritans.
Vancouver police credit 3 people for jumping to help during a violent robbery and share advice about buying and selling things online. Plus,
a very devastating moment for the families.
A sad end in the search for a BC trucker last seen in Manitoba. Also,
it's some simple steps you can take and it will save a life.
Trying to save more black bears. One group in the Kootenay says it's working.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Vancouver police are applauding a group of Good Samaritans they say helped stop a robbery on Tuesday. It happened during a Facebook market exchange in Olympic Village. As John Hernandez explains, the meetup between the buyer and the seller quickly turned violent.
You could call it a holiday helping hand during a desperate time of need. The attempted robbery happened in Vancouver's Olympic Village on Tuesday night. 2 people agreed to meet up for a Facebook marketplace exchange. One of them was selling a computer graphics card. Now those can cost upwards of $1,000. During the exchange, the buyer tried to flee without paying, running down this street. When he was confronted by the seller was allegedly pepper sprayed. That's when 2 Good Samaritans jumped in.
There were 2 witnesses. They were food delivery workers who were nearby, who heard calls for help, saw the aftermath of the robbery, and rushed to intervene. They were joined by a 3rd person who just happened to be in the Olympic Village who was running errands. And working together, the 3 of them were able to stop the suspect from fleeing.
During the scuffle, one of the food delivery drivers was stabbed in the hand, the other was stabbed in the shoulder, but they were able to hold the suspect down until police arrived. Now, police say they arrested a 21-year-old man who is known to them, and the VPD says while it never encourages people to put themselves in harm's way, they do acknowledge that the Good Samaritans actually helped an arrest get made in this case. Sergeant Steve Addison says the incident also highlights the inherent risks with selling valuable items online.
We encourage people, if they're going to make those transactions, to take extreme precautions. While you're never going to eliminate the risk, you're never going to completely eliminate the risk involved. One of the things that we encourage people to do, and I know that other police agencies are doing the same thing, come do it in front of the police station. Police
say the suspect is still in custody, but no charges have been laid. As for the Good Samaritans, they're both okay and could be honored in the near future. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
The search for a BC truck driver last seen in Winnipeg has ended in tragedy. His body was discovered last night by police. As Zubina Ahmed reports, police have not yet released any information about his death.
This is the parking lot in Furby Street, where Farah Mohammed's semi-truck was last seen. The 34-year-old truck driver drove from Vancouver to Winnipeg. He delivered his shipment last Friday on December 22nd, and that was the last time his family heard from him. Family friend Saeed Ahmed says Mohammed was found dead. Ahmed says he learned about the death from the father late last night.
Police informed them that they discovered his body not far away from where you did the interview with them. It was a very devastating moment for the family, so they're hoping to receive more answers today.
Ali Mohammed traveled from Edmonton to look for his missing son. He told CBC on Tuesday they last heard from him on December 22nd around dinner time.
He spoke to his wife and he asked her if the kids came from the school and came home safely. Since then, there's no communication.
Mohammed moved to Canada from Somalia in 2011. The father of 3 lived in Delta, BC with his wife.
He was really hard worker, a family man, and very really cool guy, usual nice guy, family man, loves what he was doing.
Mohammed's employer, Reef Trucking Enterprises, say they believe he pulled into the parking lot to sleep after completing his delivery. They say that he had another shipment to load the next morning. They refuse to comment further because his death is still under investigation. The Winnipeg police is not divulging any more information further. Zabina Ahmed, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A silent vigil was held in Vancouver to honor victims of femicide in BC. Advocates held placards with the names and ages of BC women who were killed by men this year. Through police reports and media, Vancouver Rape Relief and Women's Shelter counted 14 victims this year. It notes it's not an official number and says it's unclear how many women were actually killed by men in 2023.
Very hard to actually get an accurate count. We monitor media, we monitor police statement, but we know we don't have the full list. So definitely one of our demands is that either the police or the BC coroner publishes the full name, the full list of women, so we know who they were, so we can mourn her.
Advocates are calling for more information about the cases, along with more affordable housing for female victims of violence. Several recent polls show support is waning for the BC United Party. The ruling NDP has a comfortable lead ahead of next year's provincial election, and the BC Conservatives are gaining popularity. BC United leader Kevin Falcon told Early Edition host Stephen Quinn there's confusion among voters between the BC Conservatives and their federal counterparts.
And the reason you can really easily check that out is by just looking at the fundraising numbers. Look at what the NDP have raised. We're right behind them. We've raised 76% of what they've raised, and you know, we're the opposition, so it's a lot tougher. And then way down you have the Green Party, and then right at the very bottom along the x-axis of a graph are the BC Conservatives. They've raised over the last year about $150,000. You know, we've raised almost $2 million.
But if people were confusing with the federal party, wouldn't they be getting well-funded?
No. The reason why people are confusing the federal party is they just think when they're being asked who would you vote for, they're saying Pierre Poilievre, effectively the Conservatives, right? They're saying Conservative Party. But the reason you can tell that it's not the BC Conservative Party, because if it was, you'd see a whole bunch of money going their way too.
And when it comes to housing, Falcon argues the NDP government is not doing enough to build more homes in BC.
What they forgot to do was actually deal with the supply challenge, which is a huge one. Now in year 7 of their government, admittedly, they've now realized, maybe we should have dealt with supply, and now they're bringing in a flurry of legislation. But the problem is, we've now got 7 years of doing nothing on the most critical part of that equation. And the 114,000 homes they said they were going to build, affordable homes in 10 years, they built 16,000, and we're in year 7 of the 10-year plan. We also saw government spending a huge amount of money, and not just during COVID, but before COVID, both provincially here in British Columbia and also federally. And I think the combination of that has also, frankly, led to higher interest rates now. So there's macro issues, there's a whole bunch of other issues, but, government at the end of the day can't just keep pointing fingers and saying, it's COVID one week, and it's the federal government the next week, it's interest rates the next week. At some point, they have to be accountable after 7 years in government for something.
Falcon was also asked about his party's plan to fight climate change. He has said he would scrap the carbon tax for farmers and on all home heating fuels if elected, and he wants to reduce emissions by using LNG.
I care a lot about the environment. I have 2 young daughters in grade 5 and grade 8. I want to make sure that we get results, that we're not just going to punish British Columbians, hurt our economy, and not have any contribution to global emission reductions. So that's why we've said we're huge supporters of LNG, because when we take our liquefied natural gas and we export it to China, to India, to Korea, to Japan, we allow them to get off of coal-fired power, reducing emissions by 50%. It's not perfect, I get it. The purists will come and say to me, Kevin, it's still a fossil fuel. I get that, but we have to help the world transition to lower emissions too. And remember, BC only represents 0.17% of emissions. We could shut down everything in BC, park every car, turn off every light, and it would be less than 2 days emissions out of China.
We'll have more year-end recaps from the leaders of other provincial parties later this week. Less than a month after he was appointed, the BC government has now removed a municipal advisor for Kamloops, and it's not clear why.
The ministry representatives that called me simply said that the government had decided to take a different direction, and that's the only explanation that I received.
Former Liberal Education Minister Peter Fassbender was given the job after an unusual unanimous vote by Kamloops City Council in October, asking the provincial government for help amid lawsuits, investigations, and concerns surrounding the first-time mayor's conduct. The Ministry of Municipal Affairs says it's working quickly to find someone else to fill Fassbender's role. There is more speculation about the investigation into the killing of Surrey Sikh temple leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar. He was gunned down on temple grounds in June. Now the Global Mail is reporting that arrests in his murder are expected soon. Mira Baines tells us what we do know.
Giant posters with Hardeep Singh Nijjar's image are visible at the Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara in Surrey. He was the temple's president and supported the creation of Khalistan, an independent state to be carved out of India.
It's very bad. People are frustrated about this.
Community members have mixed reactions about a Globe and Mail report that says arrests in the temple leader's killing could happen soon.
I'm not sure about the arrests that are coming, but I'm sure that can't have evidence.
The Integrated Homicide Investigation Team issued a statement in light of the recent newspaper report. IHIT spokesperson Sergeant Timothy Pirati said, "This remains an active investigation, and as such, IHIT cannot comment on any investigational steps being taken or any evidence that has been collected." The federal government has faced criticism for not taking more action against foreign interference. This comes even after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said there were credible allegations the Indian government may have been involved in Nijjar's murder.
It's possible that this leak of information might have been done purposely. Since basically fall 2022, we've seen the Globe and Mail coming out constantly, and other media, including CBC, coming out with information, privileged information, to force the hand of the Kenyan government.
With no official word about any arrests, suggestions that they may be coming are cold comfort to the congregation here. Mira Baines, CBC News, Surrey.
Things are looking up for black bears in Nelson. Last year, the West Kootenay city was listed as one of the deadliest communities in BC for black bears. But as Corey Bullock now reports, one group is trying to reverse those numbers.
Last year, 21 bears were reportedly killed in Nelson, 17 of which were in city limits. Many of them were addicted to garbage. Now the URSA project is working to fix that. The group is working to educate the public about things like garbage and fruit trees, which are some of the #1 attractants for bears.
We go door to door and talk to people about what are your challenges? Do you need help trying to figure out where you can put your garbage or how to manage your compost? And so we just talk about with every resident that we reach, and we do farmers markets and reach out that way as well, but just try to get people to understand that it's some simple steps you can take and it will save a life.
So far, she says, it's working.
You know, last year they killed 17 bears in town, and we are so delighted to say that not one single bear has been killed in our city limits this year.
CBC News reached out to the BC Conservation Officer Service, which could not confirm these numbers for Nelson, but it did applaud people like Graves for their work in bear smart practices. According to provincial predator data, more than 660 bears were killed by November of this year in BC, and that's why Graves is doing what she does.
And I just want to give people, you know, a glimmer of hope and let people know that your actions mean something and it could save lives.
The group hopes to continue saving lives and make sure bears in BC remain wild. Corey Bullock, CBC News, Cranbrook.
Across this country, Canadians are experiencing an unseasonably warm winter. And Yvette Brenz shows us that's frustrating for those who love snow sports and the businesses that rely on them.
The holiday break is usually a great time to hit the slopes, but not enough snow to bother for these skiers.
It used to be all beautiful with the snows and everything. Right now, no, it's just gravel. So we just decided not to.
Snowboard sales here are slow despite discounts.
I think right now there's just a lot of disappointment. We were a little impatient, and now it's time, and we don't really get to get out there, so it's a bummer.
The El Nino weather pattern has warmed the west coast.
We expected a lot more snow. We expected that to be frozen over to get the skates out, but it's still beautiful.
But other parts of Canada are also unseasonably warm, making it difficult for businesses banking on winter weather.
December is always a challenge with Mother Nature for us, but it seems to be getting harder and harder, and this year especially has been difficult.
In Alberta last Friday, 10 temperature records were broken. At least 2 were 50 years old, according to Environment and Climate Change Canada. Some parts got close to 15 degrees Celsius.
Well, absolutely. It's very unlike this time of the year when in Canada. I mean, we are the snowiest country in the world. We're the second coldest, and this is more like a Vancouver Christmas from coast to coast. It is absolutely, in many ways, shocking because it is national.
So with slopes like this, a lot of people are checking the weather daily for any sign of new snow.
I bought a 5-day pass to Whistler and I haven't used it yet, so, and a lot of people have done that, so I feel sorry for them, I really do. And I feel sorry for all the resorts and everything because, you know, they're trying to make some money, right? And it's hard to make money when you don't have any snow.
For now, all skiers can do is hope. Yvette Bren, CBC News, Vancouver.
Santa didn't bring snow, did he, Russ?
No,
at least not much.
Not to my neighborhood. No.
Neither of mine. And we've discussed this, and I know I harp on this. Up in the mountains is great.
And they will be coming to the mountains. I really suspect, as we discussed, a week or so ago, Dan, that the stratospheric warming event, it looks on the models like it's going to be kicking in during the second week of January. That's going to weaken those jet stream at the highest, most northerly latitudes. That destabilizes the polar vortex. We'll start to see these lobes of colder air moving down across much of our Canadian provinces. But not today. An interesting event happened earlier today. We had a high surf advisory. It was ended about an hour and a half ago by Environment Canada. King tides, very high tides occurring. Full moon was last night. The winter solstice was 6 days ago. We had onshore winds for Victoria. It now looks like our model data is actually going to retreat the higher water levels away from Victoria. The high surf advisory has ended, so we escaped the worst of that. As far as what's going on province-wide, the jet stream continues to come from the south and steers these huge lows all the way up the coastline. So our freezing level, it's elevated. It is really warm out there. Double-digit highs across the region again today in spite of the clouds and some intermittent rainfall at times. Have a look at some of our numbers here from earlier today. We got to 10 degrees at Cultus Lake, of all things. 14 leading the way in West Vancouver. Will it continue to be mild? It will, if you consider that tonight's overnight low is above the typical daytime high for this time of year. Full forecast, Dan, a little later in the show.
Sounds good. Thanks, Russ. Well, local cheese shops in BC are bracing for the impacts of a cheese trade deadlock between Canada and the UK. After Brexit, an interim deal allowed Canada to import British cheese tariff-free. But that deal is now dead by the end of this year. As Ali Petarge tells us, some local shops are worried about meeting demand.
Well, if you enjoy a good slice of Stilton this holiday season, this could be the last year where you could get some at a reasonable price. Stiltons, along with Wensleydales and British Cheddars, are some of the most popular items offered at The Cheeseman in North Vancouver. Owner Doug Martin says British cheeses make up roughly 20% of his sales.
Christmas time, it probably goes up because a lot of cheeses like Stilton are very Christmassy cheeses. And there's a lot of expats on the North Shore, and so we see a lot of British cheeses being sold through here.
But next year, lovers of British cheese may have to make do with French, Swiss, Italian, or Canadian, because an interim cheese trade agreement between Canada and the UK, called the Cheese Letters, is set to expire at the end of the year. After Brexit, the UK also had to exit its trade agreement with Canada. But for 3 years, the Cheese Letters allowed Canada to import British cheeses without tariff, as both parties worked to negotiate a long-term deal.
Well, that permanent agreement has not happened. So we're sitting here saying, well, the premise should still stand. The Global Affairs Canada should extend the Cheese Letters so that our business is not disrupted.
This could cause a major slowdown in imports, and shortages could mean price increases. For Martin, he says keeping British cheeses in stock will be more difficult.
If the prices have gone up, obviously we have to pass that price on.
He says it's not just the price at stake, but also missing out on unique UK products.
So that's a white Stilton with mango and ginger. So how do you find a replacement for that elsewhere?
Exporters on the other side of the Atlantic are also feeling the pressure.
it wouldn't take an awful long time to actually to decimate it, to be honest, and that's worrying. And it would affect us on this side of the water in terms of the amount we're buying from cheesemakers, but it also will affect jobs in Canada as well.
Martin says he thinks those in the cheese business are caught in the middle.
Well, there's a lot of moving parts in the background that you or I probably aren't aware of, and those are the things that are on the negotiating table. But
in the meantime, if customers end up making a switch to different products, Martin says other cheesemakers, including those in Canada, could benefit from the shortage. Ali Patarga, CBC News, North Vancouver.
The world of science saw highs and lows in 2023, from space research to deep sea exploration. After the break, our Bob McDonald tells us his top science stories of this year. Stick around. And hello to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream. Thanks for being here. As many of us celebrate the holiday season by giving gifts, a Regina woman says she received the greatest gift of all, a life-saving heart transplant. CBC's Tyreek Reed has more on how she's paying tribute to her donor.
For Adrienne Mahoney, this song is close to her heart, a heart that once belonged to someone else. She created the music in honor of her donor and the donor's family.
Gratitude and words, I found myself at a loss. I couldn't properly articulate in a letter format a thank you. And so that's where I turned to what I knew best, and it was music. And I said, like, if I can't use words to describe the magnitude of my gratitude and my family's gratitude, maybe music can be the vehicle or the way to express the unexpressible, if you will.
6 years ago, Mahoney suffered heart failure and was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease. In 2019, she received a heart transplant. After the surgery, she began to compose a song. But then a cancer diagnosis and multiple surgeries made her worry she wouldn't live to see the song's completion.
The hardest times for me, it became the beacon to keep pushing towards, because half of it wasn't recorded yet. And as I experienced more heart problems and cancer and other issues, finishing the next track became the focus.
And her band promised they'd continue on with the project if she died.
That's always been the agreement between the musicians, that it would go forward with or without her, but thank goodness it's with her this time.
The song is normally played with a 10-piece band and includes sounds from the medical device that kept her alive.
And she wanted a bunch of that messy noise and that kind of, confusing, sometimes beautiful, sometimes disgusting, sounds all in there to not leave out any of the experience that she went through.
But Mahoney says the most special part of this song is its ending, when you hear her donor's heart beating.
I wanted to give them what I thought was the biggest gift I could give a musician, and it's to share their loved one's voice one last time. And for me, I see that heartbeat that ends the track as the most important voice on this entire thing. And so if it gives one more chance, one more acknowledgement of the sacredness of this and the sanctity of it, that was always my intention.
Mahoney has written a letter to the family of the donor and knows she may never know their names or meet them, but hopes somehow they'll hear her song. Tyreek Reed, CBC News, Regina.
This year has been a dynamic one, to say the least, for science research, climate events, and space exploration. CBC Radio's Bob McDonnell is the host of Quirks and Quarks. He's been keeping a running tab of the standouts, and he joins us now to tell us about 4 of his top science stories of 2023. Bob, a lot to choose from this year. What piqued your interest in the world of science in 2023?
Well, Dan, one of the first stories is about space, and it's a Canadian story. Our Canadian astronaut, Jeremy Hansen, is going to fly to the moon. And it's the first time a Canadian's gone to the moon, and the first time since 1972 that anyone's gone to the moon. He's not going to land. He's going to go there on a 10-day mission as part of the Artemis II mission with 3 other astronauts. They're going to circle the moon and come back. But what's different about this one is that they're going to go beyond the moon. They're going to go farther into space than anyone's ever gone. And there's actually going to come a point where they'll be able to look back and see both the moon, the full moon, and the Earth in the same shot out the window. That's going to be amazing. No humans ever saw that. So it's going to be quite a flight. Hopefully get off next year.
Amazing. And another one to do with the space as well, right? A big telescope.
The James Webb Space Telescope, the most powerful one we've ever put into space, continues to rewrite the astronomy textbooks. It looks back farther in time than any telescope has ever done before, and it's seeing galaxies that are less than 1 billion years old. That's really, really young. And what they're finding is that these galaxies are much more mature than they thought before. They thought that galaxies started out kind of rough and then turned into beautiful spirals like ours, but they're finding way back there, they're much more developed. So it's rethinking how galaxies come together and how stars started, looking at our own origins is kind of exciting.
And the images that it is bringing back are stunning. Oh, yeah. So space research, obviously a highlight this year. What else caught your eye?
Well, one of the other things is the wildfire season that we had this year. Not just in BC, but right across Canada. There were more fires than ever on record. 2023 was the hottest year on record. And to me, it just says that climate change is no longer a thing of the future. It's here. It's now. It's in our face. And I'm just hoping that this is a wake-up call to move on to clean energy, and just get on with it, because it's not going to get any better.
And to round out, we've got AI and ChatGPT, lots of things going on with that. What piqued your interest there?
Well, I've been doing some surveys, and I found that a lot of people in the public are afraid of artificial intelligence. It's going to turn into Terminator and take over the world. I don't think that's going to happen. But ChatGPT and artificial intelligence are proving to be very, very powerful tools. And in fact, Canada's top prize, the Hertzberg Gold Medal, was given to Joshua Bengio, who was one of the founders of artificial intelligence. And he said, it's a great tool. It's going to do wonders for science, but we have to be careful how it's used and that it's not misused. So like any powerful tool that's come along in the past, we have to be careful about how it's used. But it's an exciting new time in computer intelligence.
Let's just hope we avoid Skynet. Bob McDonnell, CBC Radio's host of Quirks and Quarks. Thanks so much, Bob.
Thank you, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
We're going to take a closer look into one of those top science stories now. This past summer, destructive wildfires in West Kelowna and Lahaina, Hawaii, seemed to come out of nowhere. Our Michelle Gassou broke down the environmental and meteorological factors that can affect how fast a fire moves and how quickly it can spread.
The McDougall Creek fire that destroyed homes in West Kelowna seemed to come out of nowhere, forcing thousands to evacuate. It grew about 20 kilometers in just 12 hours. That's one of the fastest growing wildfires in BC's history. We've seen other destructive fires like this one that move with such speed, people had no choice but to flee, from Lytton, BC to Lahaina on Maui. So why do some fires go from spark to inferno so fast, and why do they seem to be getting worse? The McDougall Creek wildfire here in West Kelowna started as a spot fire. It was first discovered August 15th. And over a 24-hour period, it grew from 64 hectares to 68 square kilometers. The night of August 17th, people watched in horror as the fire barreled down the hill towards them, moving at incredible speeds.
When I say extreme, what it means is that they are moving faster than we can effectively put firefighting resources on them.
Every fire behaves differently, but there are specific conditions that determine how quickly they move and grow.
So when we talk about fire and like fire behavior, we always talk about triangles. So topography, fuels, and weather. And so there's combinations of topography, fuels, and weather that kind of lead to sometimes to aggressive fire behavior.
Let's start with perhaps the most important factor in all these fires: weather and often powerful winds. In West Kelowna, wind gusts pushed the fire aggressively towards town, even causing it to jump Lake Okanagan.
You could see it moving quite quickly, and then when it started coming down the hill, I mean, with the winds kind of pushing it, that's what sort of allowed it to come down. But we saw aggressive fire behavior, and this is where, you know, the fire itself starts to exhibit some influence on what you're seeing. When a fire starts to generate a lot of energy and a lot of heat, it's actually going to generate wind that pulls the fire along. We had really, really high wind speeds that day, so 50 to 70 kilometers an hour or higher with gusts. And when you get these large aggressive fires with these big convective columns, what's happening is you have a lot of ember transport and the transport of other materials like pine cones, branches, twigs, other sorts of materials that are picked up by that fire into the smoke column or in the wind and then carried long distances. And so what we saw in Kelowna on August 17th with those wind speeds was ember transport across the lake, which, you know, is maybe a kilometer or two wide where it jumped the lake. And so those embers and those materials got into the fuels on the other side of the lake and started the fires that we saw in Lake Country and on the Kelowna side versus West Kelowna.
We now know that in Lahaina, the fire that destroyed the town was exacerbated by strong easterly trade winds whipped up by Hurricane Dora. That fire grew by a mile a minute. That's as fast as a car driving on a highway.
Wind is everything. It's really that last piece of the puzzle because it fuels oxygen to the fire. So just the same way as if you had a campfire and you're getting down to blow on the embers to really start that fire, the wind acts as that really driving force behind fires.
Next up in our fire triangle is topography. Fires can move very fast uphill. Heat rises, preheating fuels that are further up on a slope, igniting them quickly once the fire reaches them.
Fires really like to move up steep slopes, but in the case of the West Kelowna wildfires, we saw the fire actually moving downslope, and I think that really had to do from the winds pushing at that fire's back down the slope. But we also were experiencing some issues of probably rolling debris and embers rolling down that slope and creating small spot fires underneath, which were then burning up and connecting to that main fire source.
Topography played a huge role in the destruction of Lytton. The village sits inside a canyon. The day of the fires, temperatures soared to 49.5 degrees Celsius. High winds raced down into Lytton, acting like a blowtorch on the landscape. All it took was a spark for almost the entire village to go up in flames.
Coming this way, fast! Let's get out of here.
The Lytton fire station camera caught one last image of the fire heading into town just before a majority of the village was destroyed. The last piece of the fire triangle is fuel. Lytton, Lahaina, and West Kelowna all experienced sustained droughts before these fires struck. So there was lots of dry material from trees to shrubs, grass, and pine cones ready to burn. One thing we can control is the amount of available fuel. Doing more prescribed burns can get rid of dry material that can burn.
So our treatments need to be on the scale of the fires that we're seeing. So if we're seeing 5,000 hectare fires, and some of our treatments should be 5,000 hectares or more. So it's that pattern that we need to create across the landscape, and we just need to do a lot more of it. And we don't have forever. The way things are changing quite rapidly with climate change and the creation of more fuels and the accumulation of more fuels is we have a limited window.
The people who have fought and studied fires worry these kinds of aggressive wildfires are becoming more severe and more frequent because our climate is changing. When topography, fuel, and weather come together, fires can get so dangerous, even firefighters may be forced to retreat.
To be honest, sometimes it just becomes too dangerous to actually have personnel on that type of fire where you're seeing that kind of fire behavior. And as a wildland firefighter, those are the ones where we start talking about making sure you have an escape route, making sure you have a way to get out of the fire into a safety zone in case you had to get away from that fire. When I was a wildland firefighter, it seems like fires are different. They're more aggressive, and it's becoming a more dangerous sort of thing sometimes to action some of these fires. And so I think like there's an urgency with that if we're going to live with these type of fires on the landscape, how do we do that?
The McDougall Creek fire destroyed or damaged almost 170 structures. In Lytton, an entire village was lost and 2 elderly people died. In Lahaina, the death toll is 115 people, and many more are still missing. Fast-moving fires are dangerous to the people who live on these landscapes. As our climate changes and as fires like these become more common, the ways we mitigate and fight them will have to adapt too.
Attack from above. How a boom in the pigeon population is causing health concerns in India. That story's next.
Mikey Ham created a 90s world of skateboarding teen adventurers during the pandemic. But what started as a couple of short stories, he realized was better suited as a role-playing board game.
I'm inspired by a lot of Saturday morning cartoons and stuff I grew up with, but also really just inspired by the idea of exploring teenagehood, both like my own and just the teenagers in general and the whole idea. And I have kids that are hurtling towards that age faster than it seems possible.
It won Role-Playing Game of the Year from the Indie Groundbreaker Awards. David Plamondon is the owner of Pomedoway Games. He says that while their store carries a lot of locally made games, Slug Blaster has something special.
But I do think Slug Blaster really kind of stands above them in terms of the design, the charm, the passion behind it, and really the care that Mikey put into developing the game and wanting to make sure that it's representative of not just his lived experience, but other people's lived experiences, being able to tell their stories in that setting.
The Dungeons & Dragons style game takes place in the fictional Hillview, based on Three Hills, Alberta. According to the game manual, Hillview has a gas station, a curling rink, 14 churches, and some of the thinnest space-time fabric on the planet.
In some ways, this is almost a memoir because I put a lot of stuff about my own teenagehood in there, and the small town it takes place in as your starting base is almost a one-to-one replica of my small town that I grew up in.
The manual's illustrators include local artists, and the first couple copies were also printed in Alberta. Ham is creating a second edition of the game sold in a pizza-style box. It's expected to hit the shelves this spring. Emily Williams, CBC News, Edmonton.
An Alberta family reported missing on Christmas Day has now been found dead. Police say the bodies of all 3 members have been recovered from Lac Saint Anne, about 50 kilometers northwest of Edmonton. Kelly Pelsma, his wife Laura, and their 8-year-old son Dylan were last seen December 23rd. They were going to go off-roading on the family's side-by-side UTV. They were reported missing, but they didn't show up to a planned event. The bodies and the ATV were found in an area of the lake where the water rarely freezes because of a strong current. Israel continues to expand its offensive in Gaza as the humanitarian crisis in the territory deepens and the need for urgent aid increases. Julia Wong has more.
For this Palestinian family, life gets harder by the day. We are displaced, Amjad Hajjaj says, displaced to a very primitive house. They are among the many who have fled their homes. Nearly 85% of people living in Gaza are displaced. As Israel escalates attacks in central Gaza, many who were sheltering in a UN-run school now frantically looking for an escape, though some say there's nowhere to go. The people of Gaza do not need aid, one man says. Our message to the entire world: implement a ceasefire. But Israel warns the war could last for months, and it says it's trying to be surgical with its operations.
My information is that civilian casualties are going down, and that's a good thing.
But the Hamas-run health ministry says the toll is only rising, reporting more than 21,000 people killed and more than 55,000 injured since the start of the war. The conflict has drawn the ire of Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority which governs the West Bank. In his first interview since the war started with an Egyptian TV station, what's happening to the Palestinian people on the ground is more than a catastrophe and more than a genocide. Israel maintains its objective is to free the hostages in Gaza and defeat Hamas, and calls the loss of civilian life in the crossfire tragic. And with the WHO saying more than half of Gaza's hospitals are not functioning, this international team of doctors says more medical help is needed. The Gaza Strip needs include surgeons, care for trauma patients, intensive care units, and surgical specialties, a spokesperson for an Islamic charity says.
There are reports U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will visit the Middle East again next week, his fourth trip since the conflict started. Washington has been pressing Israel to scale down its assault and take a more targeted approach. Julia Wong, CBC News, London.
The pigeon population has exploded in India's most populous city. There are now so many of the birds in Mumbai, it has triggered a serious health problem for people. As Salima Shivji shows us, cases of a chronic lung disease have skyrocketed.
A common sight in Mumbai. Pigeons at every turn, along with those feeding them. A seemingly innocuous pastime that's fueling a health emergency.
Okay, good.
This pulmonologist is seeing more patients walk through his door with hypersensitivity pneumonitis, a severe inflammation of the lungs that in the worst cases requires an oxygen supply 24/7 or a transplant.
So there are more than 300 reasons to get this hypersensitive pneumonia. Pigeons is one of them. Okay. Most important thing, this is the most common cause of the disease in our country.
It comes from pigeon poo, which has fungi that when inhaled over a sustained period can be deadly. Mumbai's doctors have tracked a 5-fold increase in cases of the disease as the city's pigeon population has exploded.
And then patient points out so that this may be a possibility.
Dr. Prabhu Desai says he's forced to hand out an information chart because patients often don't know that pigeons are the culprit.
Because they are very stubborn birds, you can say. They don't go.
Patients like Namrata Trivedi, who's relieved to finally be back at work after years of steroids and rehab to suppress her symptoms. When I was first diagnosed, the x-rays showed an entire black patch across my lungs. I was told I had only 3 years to live, she says, all because I used to feed the pigeons. I had no idea.
Cases are so high here in Mumbai because it's the perfect breeding ground for pigeons. Dense with so many apartment buildings and a tradition of feeding the birds for religious reasons like washing away your sins that's hard to break.
That tradition irks Prakash Punjabi as he goes through the exercises that help control his chronic condition. He needs oxygen to get him through the session.
It's very difficult. Normally, when you walk, so I find it difficult while breathing through nose.
Punjabi suspects he got the disease when he spent so much time at home during the pandemic, but he also frequently sees others feeding the pigeons.
You can't ban or anything. You can't do anything. Only you have to be very cautious.
Technically, there are fines against feeding pigeons outside of designated areas, but that bylaw is rarely enforced. It's left up to doctors to plead with the people of Mumbai. Don't feed the birds. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Mumbai.
A project that could negate decades worth of pollution playing out here in BC. More on how researchers are hoping to store emissions after this.
It's a brisk winter day here in the PEI National Park. This is a busy time for birders. Every December, they tally up the birds they see as part of an annual bird count to get a snapshot of what's here on the island. And there will be some new names for them to learn in 2024. Kathy Martin is a longtime member and former president of the American Ornithological Society.
Basically, the idea is to remove or to change all the eponymous names. Eponymous name means a bird that's species name that's named after a person. So it could be Ross's gull, Swainson's thrush, Cooper's hawk. To remove any names that are considered offensive for certain sectors of the birding community.
The change will affect close to 80 species, about 25 here on Prince Edward Island. Kathy Martin admits not everyone likes the idea.
Some people feel that it's removing history because some of these birds were named after people as an honor because they made a lot of contributions to ornithology. Every time the names are changed, it ruffles somebody's feathers.
Martin says the goal is to give the birds names that are more descriptive, to make them easier to remember for new birders.
So, for example, the Wilson's warbler, which is a beautiful little warbler, yellow breast and black head, might be renamed something like the black cap warbler or the black-headed warbler, which if you're new to birding, it'll be a lot easier to remember that than to remember the name Wilson's warbler.
Kate Gordon has been a birder since moving to PEI in 2017.
I'm fine with relearning a few names, and if the American Ornithological Society wants to rename things, I'm fine with that too. The idea that it makes it more accessible to people, that it's easier to look for a bird and know what it is if you have a descriptive name for it.
One of the goals of the renaming project is to get more people involved in birding. So the Society will be asking the public for ideas for new names.
Yeah, the idea is to kind of celebrate the changes, and with the idea of getting people to get more interested in birds and biodiversity and conservation of wildlife.
It will take some time to rename all of the birds, but Martin says some of the names will be ready in time for next year's Christmas bird count. Nancy Russell, CBC News, Cove Head.
Hey, I'm Johanna Wagstaff.
And hi there, I'm Rohit Joseph.
And we're asking for 10 minutes of your day to go through the 10 things that the UN recommends we can all do when it comes to climate change.
Please don't leave.
No.
And also, the things aren't new.
We are just wired to not do them.
We promise you to help you figure out your brains, and you and your people can make better choices to combat climate change.
10 Minutes to Save the Planet is available now on CBC Listen and everywhere you get your podcasts.
Meteorologist Russ Lacade is back with the BC-wide forecast. The full version And the big question, why is it so bloody warm?
It's a good question, Dan, because, I mean, you heard all the chatter over the last several months as well. El Nino is coming, and we had a really good idea that it was going to be sort of wreaking havoc on ocean currents, which would impact what was going on in the atmosphere and such. But that's sort of a lot of buzzwords. The visual tells the story. Very active jet stream over the eastern Pacific. Again, one storm after another. This next one will dive down south into the base of the trough off coastal California and slowly migrate up towards the coast again and impact BC. So everything's coming from the south. Even the circulation around this semi-permanent high setting up in the prairies here is forcing warmer air into the prairie provinces. So all of our breeze really aloft coming from southerly destinations just keeps our temperatures, anywhere from 5 to 10 degrees above average for this time of year. There's our main weather maker, that big low abeam of Vancouver Island. It's going to track straight on up the coastline. Lots of rain on the way for Haida Gwaii. Strong winds across Vancouver Island, maybe not as strong along sections of the north and central outer coast as that low begins to pull away towards the Gulf of Alaska. Your province-wide forecast for BC tomorrow? Well, all the active weather really is on the coastline. We have a rainfall warning for Haida Gwaii in excess of 50 millimeters. The wind warning dropped for the exposed sections of the Central Coast, but still in effect for the North Island, East Island, and sections of the Sunshine Coast, as well as Victoria. About 70 with a few maximum gusts as high as 110 for tonight into early Thursday morning. What that means in terms of our sensible weather province-wide, yeah, it's wet, it's windy in Prince Rupert, 8 degrees, staying mild in Tofino, 11 in the rain, really mild in Victoria. I think that's lighter intermittent rain tomorrow. And we start talking about what's happening on the Coast Range mountains. There's only a little bit of cold air left over there. So maybe the temperature bottoms out around +1 in Whistler tomorrow. A little slushy stuff showing up, but ultimately the village is wet at 4 degrees, snow mid-mountain and above. Bella Coola, again, the temperature moderates from near the freezing mark up to 6 degrees. Terrace, sloppy conditions, mixed rain and snow. Everywhere east of the Coast Range, completely drying out. Didn't get it on the map, but Fort Nelson -9 and sunny tomorrow. 6 above in Williams Lake. It is really mild and sunny as well. Cold and a few flakes early on, but the rest of the day looks pretty good. And for BC, for lower mainland here, it's continuing to be mild. We wrap up 2023 with double-digit highs for the next 4 days. Friday's your break in the action. It dries out for a peak or two of sun. A little light rain sort of closes in again Saturday. Sunday's wet, but it's primarily during the day. So your New Year's Day forecast, pretty good chance it dries out and cools off. Fingers crossed it looks that way for a few days into the new year.
Sounds good. Thanks, Russ.
You're welcome.
A group of BC researchers is working on a potentially game-changing way to store emissions. Julia Wong shows us their plan to sequester carbon dioxide below the seafloor.
The climate impacts have to be addressed.
For Kate Moran, the fight to bring down emissions means conquering a new frontier, the ocean.
The ocean has the biggest capacity, including the ocean basalt, to actually help us with removing CO2 from the atmosphere.
The Solid Carbon Project is the first of its kind in Canada, years in the making. Wind turbines will power direct air capture technology, aiming to suck CO2 from the air, then pump it below the ocean floor, where the CO2 would react with basalt, eventually turning into rock. Carbon sequestration is already happening on land, but Moran says this is different.
This technology is the ultimate in terms of durability because it will react with the basalt, form rock, and never go back into the atmosphere.
This past summer, the team went on an expedition to survey the ocean floor and to test camera equipment and CO2 monitoring devices.
Then we're looking at this Cascadia region.
Its focus is on the Cascadia Basin, 300 kilometers off Vancouver Island. The team says basalt there has the potential to store 750 gigatons of CO2, or up to 20 years of global emissions. These red clusters show how much basalt there is on Earth. The big question is whether all this can be done.
It's not going to capsize or something like that. So it does look like a feasible way to do it.
I think for some people that concept might just be a little mind-blowing.
Yes, and it is. I mean, it is. Anytime you go offshore, it's a more extreme environment.
Moran sees this project as necessary to help save the planet.
My view is that innovation doesn't happen without perseverance.
The team still needs to demonstrate that this can work, and they need $60 million in funding to get there.
If successful, this made-in-Canada solution could be used around the world in the fight to lower emissions. Julia Wong, CBC News, North Saanich, British Columbia.
Does a New York City cab belong in Burnaby? One man thinks so, but don't ask him to pull over for you. More on the car aficionado right after this.
All right. I like it. Why you so serious? Look up on your face. You so mysterious, like it's some kind of game. Are you delirious? You think I'm gonna stay? Well, you're stuck in your ways. I'm telling you, it's gotta change. Don't say I didn't warn ya. I'm on the other side. I started the letting go, 'cause you ain't here tonight. I'm halfway out the door. You acting surprised. Well, I don't come for free. You've got to pay the price. Oh, you don't love it, you won't lose it. If you don't get it, it will go. If you don't love it, you'll lose it. You've got to give before it's gone. You wanna hold me here, you've gotta change my mind. You watch time disappear, but I'm giving you my life. I'm trying to tell you now, they say love is blind. I'm holding on for life, you best be putting up a fight. Don't say I didn't want ya, I'm on the other side. I started to letting go, 'cause you ain't here tonight. I'm halfway out the door, you acting surprised. Well, I don't come for free, you got to pay the price. Oh, you don't love it, you won't lose it. If you don't get it, it will go. If you don't love it, you'll lose it. You got to give before it's gone.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Enjoy groundbreaking contemporary works of theatre, dance, music, and multimedia at the annual Push International Performing Arts Festival, January 19th to February 4th. For the festival program and tickets, visit pushfestival.ca. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter at cbc.ca/Vancouver Inbox and keep connected with us.
If you've noticed a New York City taxi driving around downtown Vancouver the past few months, don't try to hail it. Car enthusiast Giovanni Porta bought it in the Big Apple and drove it all the way back to town for fun.
My name is Giovanni, and right behind me here is a New York City taxi cab. This is my car. It's a 2011 Ford Crown Victoria. I got this straight from New York. I flew out there, picked it up, drove it all the way home. It's not a replica. It's a completely authentic car. Back when I was a kid, I watched a movie called Taxi. It was released in 2004 with Jimmy Fallon and Queen Latifah. That was my favorite movie as a kid, and I think that was partially inspiration for getting this car as well. This car, being a 2011, it was one of the last Crown Vics made and one of the last Crown Vic taxis put into service. I don't typically daily drive this, mostly because people try to hail me down. And it's a little, at first it was pretty funny, but when you're trying to like get somewhere and people are walking out in front of your car, then it starts to get a little bit irritating. The people that give me confused looks a lot are the other cab drivers. When I go past other cab drivers, they're looking at the car like, what's this doing in Vancouver? Who's this guy taking our fares? And sometimes they'll even come up and like comment on the car or ask me questions about it. Like I have people who sometimes think that I am a New York City cab driver. A lot of people think it's a movie car. People who don't think it's an in-service taxi typically think it's a movie car and that it's here to be on a film set or something like that. But the movie cars that I've seen here in Vancouver, they don't really look like genuine New York City taxi cabs. There's a lot of like minor details that I've made sure to get right on this car to make it completely authentic. Like for example, the top light. The top light that's used in this car is specific to New York, and it's not like the top lights that you would see on a Vancouver taxi. As far as I'm aware, no one else has brought a car like this to the West Coast or even to Vancouver. So that's part of what makes it really unique. It's so far out of place. It's really far away from its original home.
No DC cab, though. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC GM, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC. I will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. We'll see you then.